Welcome to Hangar 51 Files, where history's secrets, classified operations, and hidden truths come to light. From Cold War black ops to the future of warfare, from lost artifacts to emerging defense technologies, we investigate the stories buried beneath official narratives. No speculation, no clickbait, just hard-hitting research, expert analysis, and the pursuit of truth. You're now inside the briefing room. Stay sharp, stay curious. This is Hangar 51 Files.
Think about the ultimate gamble, right? Where the potential reward is just astronomical, but the fall could be, well, devastating.
Yeah, that razor's edge between fortune and total ruin. It's captivating, definitely, but also really dangerous.
And today, that's exactly where we're going, straight into that world. Specifically, the high-flying, high-stakes realm of old-school Florida drug smuggling.
Exactly. We're taking you on a deep dive back to the late 1970s, early 1980s. It was a time when the skies over Florida, let's just say they buzzed with more than just commercial planes.
We'll be exploring those really audacious airborne drug operations and, interestingly, uncovering some truly surprising connections, things you wouldn't normally put together.
Totally unexpected links, yeah.
And to guide us through this fascinating territory, we've pulled together some pretty compelling sources for you. We'll be looking at a family tradition, old-school Florida smuggling, which kind of gives an insider's view.
Right, how some of these operations actually worked from the inside.
And we've also got news reports, one about a Canadian drug pilot, another about a more recent French trial they called air cocaine. Just reminds you this isn't purely history, you know.
Good point. And adding to that, we've got a YouTube transcript. It unpacks the real story behind that movie, American-made, Barry Seal.
Oh, yeah, Barry Seal, legendary figure. Or infamous, maybe.
Depends who you ask, I guess. Then there's a piece from 5280 magazine about a Denver marijuana smuggler who was also, get this, a skydiving legend.
Skydiving. Okay, that's one of those connections I was talking about.
Exactly. And finally, we looked at customer reviews for a book called Sugar Alpha, The Life and Times of Senor Huevos Grandes, which remarkably is all about a skydiver getting deep into the smuggling world.
Wow. So for you listening, our mission today is pretty clear. We want to get past the sort of surface level stuff, understand the ingenious methods, the larger-than-life characters involved, and those really unexpected links.
And also explore, what drove these people? What were the motivations? And the very real dangers they faced. We want to offer you a much richer picture than just a quick overview.
Okay, let's jump in. There's a case from 1978 that really shows the sheer scale of what was happening. In the skies, specifically.
All right, let's look at the 1978 Mississippi marijuana smuggling case. Picture this. July 24th, 6 tons.
6 tons?
Yeah, 12,000 pounds of marijuana flown into Stennis Field in Mississippi. But, law enforcement knew it was coming.
So the guys on the ground, Barker, Gray, Fennell, Wright, and Dyer, they were arrested right there as they were unloading.
Pretty much caught red-handed unloading it onto trucks, so right away you see the massive quantities involved.
And the legal fallout must have been huge. Multiple federal charges, right? Distribution, possession with intent.
Conspiracy to do the same, yeah. Importation, conspiracy to import, the works.
And they all got prison time. Concurrent sentences, I see here.
They did. But, and here's where it gets interesting, legally for you, they didn't just roll over. They appealed.
Okay, so what was the basis for the appeal?
Well, one argument was about the prosecution's closing remarks. Ronald Barker's defense claimed the prosecutor kept mentioning this unarrested guy, Richard Brown, but called him Richard Barker.
Oh, so they argued that prejudiced the jury against their client, Barker.
Exactly. The trial judge actually tried to fix it, told the jury there wasn't much evidence linking Brown to the name Richard Barker, told the prosecutor to stop.
Did the appeals court buy that argument?
Ultimately, no. They didn't see it as grounds to overturn the convictions themselves. But it's a key insight for you, right? The legal complexities that can pop up even in what seems like a straightforward bust.
Definitely. But something did get reversed on appeal, didn't it?
That's right. And this is fascinating. The conspiracy convictions for 4 of them, Barker, Fennell, Wright, and Dyer, those were actually reversed.
Why? A legal error.
Yeah, basically a flaw in how those specific charges were handled. They sent those counts back for another look.
Now this case takes another wild turn. Weren't there allegations about the CIA?
Oh, yeah. The defense team actually claimed the CIA was somehow involved in this whole thing. Led to the trial being postponed in late '78 while they looked into it.
That's a bold defense. CIA involvement in a massive pot smuggling ring.
It is. And get this. One of the defendants, Vance Dyer, while he's awaiting sentencing for this case and facing other charges too, a judge actually let him travel to El Salvador.
To El Salvador? Why?
To look for documents. Documents he claimed might prove this improper CIA involvement. I mean, for you listening, that just shows the length they'd go to, right?
Yeah.
And maybe the surprising leeway they sometimes got.
It really makes you wonder, did they find anything? Any proof?
Nope, no credible evidence turned up. The trial went ahead.
And what happened to the descendants in the end?
Well, we know they were all released sometime in the early 1980s, so it gives you a sense of the timeline, the actual consequences for them.
Okay, so this name, Vance Dyer, you mentioned, he keeps popping up. And he connects to another really unexpected area. Politics.
He does. His backstory really pulls back the curtain on how interconnected these worlds could be. Let's call this section The Smuggler and the Politician.
Right, because before this Mississippi bust, Dyer already had a record in Florida, didn't he? From 77. Smuggling, what, 4,300 pounds of marijuana?
That's the one. Got a 4-year sentence, but was out on bail appealing it
Yeah.
right when the Mississippi thing happened.
And while he's out on bail, he's doing business with the Alabama State Treasurer. Seriously.
Melba Till Allen, yep. And it gets better. She actually showed up as a character witness for him at his Florida trial.
A state treasurer vouching for a convicted drug smuggler. That's something else.
Isn't it? But wait, the relationship took another twist. Dyer initially fought a subpoena related to a corruption probe into Allen, but then
He flipped.
totally flipped, became the state's key witness against her in an ethics trial.
Wow. So what came out in that trial? What was Allen actually doing?
Well, for you listening, it was pretty blatant misuse of office. She was depositing state tax money into specific banks, and in return, those banks were giving loans.
To her. And her associates.
Exactly. Often high-risk loans, very little collateral. And they were moving the money around between banks to try and dodge federal examiners. The scale was huge, almost $3 million through 130 loans from 58 different banks.
That's incredible abuse of power. So she was convicted.
Yep. Convicted and removed from office in 1978. Conflict of interest, got 3 years in prison. And the irony, she became the first person convicted under an Alabama ethics law she'd actually helped pass.
Wow. That whole saga just highlights for you how tangled up crime and even high-level politics could get back then.
Absolutely. And it also brings us back to South Florida. It really was ground zero for so much of this. Our source even calls it the den of smugglers.
Yeah, looking at those Barker family operations, the ones smuggling marijuana from Colombia, South Florida was where they got everything. The pilots, the crew, the organizers, the planes themselves. It was a whole ecosystem.
And it wasn't just one family. Media reports back in '75. Federal officials had already nabbed over 80 suspects tied to South Florida, linked to 22 different air smuggling loads just since 1972.
That's a lot of activity. What were they bringing in mostly?
Mostly marijuana back then, actually, an estimated 33,000 pounds, plus about 69 pounds of cocaine, coming from places like Colombia, Jamaica.
It's interesting for you to know, right? Cocaine became huge later, but early on, marijuana was the bulk item by weight.
Definitely. And there was a real human cost, too, something
Uh-huh.
important for you to consider. That same media analysis, it linked at least 8 deaths, people from South Florida, to 5 plane crashes tied directly to drug smuggling since '72.
So these weren't victimless crimes. The risks were incredibly real and deadly.
Tragically real. And notice this, 4 of those crash planes registered to a leasing company called Florida Airways International, owned by Kenneth J. Bernstein from Fort Lauderdale.
Okay, and what's the story with Florida Airways International?
Well, it was actually a subsidiary of another company, Carroll Investment Corporation. And they were involved in selling arms, light infantry weapons, other stuff, nationally and internationally.
Arms dealing. So for you listening, that suggests this potential overlap, right? Drug trafficking, arms dealing, South and Central America, a connection that would cause controversy for years.
Exactly. And Bernstein himself is a pretty interesting, maybe typical figure for the time. Arrested back in '74. Conspiracy to import $18 million worth of marijuana and cocaine from Mexico.
$18 million. That's massive.
Yeah.
Was he convicted?
He was in '75. Got 7 years.
But he didn't serve it all.
No. While he was out on appeal, he died. Crashed a P-51 Mustang aircraft in California in 1976.
And his death had wider implications, didn't it? Because he was cooperating.
Big time. His death potentially impacted like 64 other drug smuggling cases where he'd agreed to be a government witness.
Wow, and it affected a politician, too.
Yeah, a Florida state representative accused of feeding Bernstein confidential info about a drug investigation. After Bernstein died, the charges against the politician were dropped. You see the ripples.
Definitely. Far-reaching consequences.
And as tends to happen in these circles, rumors flew about Bernstein's death. Accident, foul play, suicide, stage death.
I mean, dying while out on appeal, about to testify, it certainly raises questions for you to think about. The dangers, the uncertainty.
It underscores the incredibly high stakes for everyone involved.
Yeah. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Let's talk about the how. The actual methods these smugglers used to try and avoid getting caught. It wasn't simple.
Not at all. Our source details some pretty ingenious and often super dangerous techniques to, quote, beat the border.
Like what?
Well, in Florida, a big one was using old, abandoned airstrips, leftovers from World War II training, or even just long, straight, isolated county roads. Florida's flat landscape offered lots of options. For you, this shows their resourcefulness.
And they didn't just use existing ones, right? They actually built their own.
Yeah, carved out private airstrips in remote spots, Everglades, pine forests, farmland, gave them privacy for unloading, obviously, and made it easier to watch for cops, do counter surveillance.
Smart. And adaptable, too. If law enforcement cracked down in one area...
They just pack up and move. Further inland, further north, keep them guessing.
Okay, so that's landing. What about while they were in the air? How did they dodge radar?
Risky maneuvers there, too. Flying on the deck, flying super low over the water, like maybe 50 feet sometimes.
50 feet over water at night.
Often at night, yeah. Trying to stay below radar coverage or maybe look like a fast boat on older systems. The margin for error was basically zero.
Sounds terrifying. And wasn't there another risky tactic? Piggybacking.
Two planes flying incredibly close together, in formation, trying to look like one bigger blip on radar.
But the risk of a mid-air collision.
Constant. A very real threat. Hugely dangerous. And then, once they actually got across the border into the U.S., landing further inland, maybe at smaller, quieter airfields, could make the flight look more like a domestic trip.
Right. Less chance of running into customs or other agencies right away. That might explain why some of those planes ended up in places like Mississippi, Georgia, Virginia, like we mentioned earlier, trying to blend in away from the coast.
There's also this other trick, almost brazen, involving flight plans. A cooperating defendant in a later case described it.
Oh, yeah. What was the trick?
Okay, so they'd file a perfectly legitimate flight plan to enter the U.S. at a major airport with customs, like Fort Lauderdale Executive or Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International. They'd even talk to air traffic control, keep their transponder on, everything by the book.
Okay, looks totally legit so far.
But here's the move. For you to understand, this is incredibly risky. When it's time to switch radio frequencies for the final approach,
Yeah.
the pilot tells ATC, okay, switching to tower frequency. But instead of actually calling the tower, sharp turn north, land at a much smaller, less watched airport nearby, like Lantana Municipal.
Lantana, it sounds like it had a bit of a reputation.
Apparently, yeah, a reputation for suspicious activity.
And if they got caught making that diversion, what was the excuse?
Just play dumb. Oh my gosh, sorry, landed at the wrong airport, so tired, long flight, confused. By the time anyone figured it out, the drugs were long gone.
That takes some serious nerve. Did it actually work?
This cooperating defendant
Yeah.
claimed he used it loads of times, never got caught. Speaks to a certain level of boldness, right?
It really does. It sounds almost too simple, too audacious to work consistently.
Well, get this. In the early 90s, undercover agents were planning a controlled delivery. They decided to actually try this method themselves.
No way. Did the officials think it would work?
Customs and FAA guys, they were convinced it wouldn't work. Not with modern tech. They were so sure it'd fail, they assigned 2 helicopters to shadow the plane, fully expecting the pilot to try and vanish with the drugs.
Okay, so what happened?
The cooperating defendant nailed it. Picked up the drugs in the Bahamas, flew toward Fort Lauderdale, then bam, last-minute diversion to Lantana. Just like planned.
And the agents on the ground, the helicopters.
Ground team watched the drugs get offloaded, arrested the suspects. Helicopter crews were reportedly just stunned. Couldn't believe the old trick still worked.
That's amazing.
Apparently, the customs agent in charge won some bets over it. And it led to a pretty serious meeting with the FAA about, this massive hole in their system. For you listening, it shows how sometimes the simplest, most audacious plans, they can be the most effective.
Truly astounding that low-tech methods could still beat the system, even then.
Okay, now we have to talk about a name that just looms large over this whole era. Barry Seal.
Yes, Barry Seal. The movie American Made brought his story up, but our YouTube transcript source gives maybe a more factual take for you.
Right. The movie suggested the CIA actively recruited him, but the transcript points out there's really no solid evidence for that.
Correct. What is clear, though, is that Seal was a major drug smuggler, maybe one of the biggest the U.S. had ever seen. Cocaine, marijuana. He was a master criminal, no doubt.
The transcript paints him as this pilot driven by, like, a thirst for excitement. Could fly anything, land anywhere, pretty much. Started as a TWA pilot, super successful, youngest captain ever, but got bored with the routine, apparently. Jumped at the chance to make big extra money smuggling. Started with explosives, actually.
But that didn't end well, though, right? Got arrested.
Yeah. Case was dismissed, but it cost him his airline job. So needing cash to keep up his lifestyle, provide for his family, he turned to drug smuggling just as it was really booming in South Florida.
Started with pot, then moved to cocaine.
Exactly. Because the money was just different. For you, this shows how that economic pull, the lure of serious wealth, could really drag people in.
The financial incentive must have been immense.
Oh, yeah. The transcript makes a great point for you. 300 kilos of marijuana. Decent haul. But 300 kilos of cocaine, that's millions of dollars.
Yeah.
You can see why pilots made the switch. The money was just too big to ignore.
And Seal built up quite an operation, didn't he, in just a few years?
Yeah, remarkably fast. Had his own fleet of planes, a private airstrip near Baton Rouge. He figured out these really ingenious, often daring routes to get cocaine from Colombia into the U.S.
Flying low over the Gulf, right, at night, lights off, using night vision.
And because there were so many oil rig helicopters out there, sometimes his low-flying planes were just mistaken for those. Clever camouflage in a way?
And his methods for getting the drugs in? Swamp airdrops, bribing officials?
All the above. Covert cash exchanges. His luck ran out for a bit in '79, though. Got arrested in Honduras for having a gun on his plane, interestingly.
But even that didn't stop him. He actually used it to connect with the Medellin cartel.
Turned it right to his advantage. His amazing piloting skills, his willingness to fly into really dangerous, remote places. That made him perfect for what the cartel needed as they were just starting to expand.
And smuggling from Medellin made him seriously wealthy.
Immensely wealthy. Made his family very comfortable, as the source puts it. For you, this shows how even getting arrested could sometimes open doors to even bigger, more dangerous opportunities in this world. It's interesting how the transcript portrays him. Like this notorious smuggler, but also apparently a devoted family man, saw the smuggling as a way to provide.
Yeah, reportedly gave his son a huge chunk of cash for his 15th birthday. But he was also incredibly careful, right, to protect himself and his family.
Extremely careful. Kept his distance from the top cartel bosses, never met them directly for a long time. They only knew him as El Gordo, the fat man. All communication through public payphones.
And he compartmentalized his operation, too. Made sure his own employees didn't know each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Minimized the risk if someone got caught. Very calculated. And his role as a top smuggler just grew. He'd often fund his own risky missions, use his own planes, buy his own fuel. Flying right into the heart of cocaine production in Colombia was seen as like this fabulous coup, despite the insane danger.
Eventually, he did meet the cartel bosses face-to-face, Escobar and the others.
He did, yeah. By '84, the cartel was under pressure in Colombia and looking for safer smuggling routes. Nicaragua, under the Sandinista government, looked like a potential safe haven.
And that's where Seal got involved in a plan to use a Sandinista military base for cocaine shipments.
Allegedly, yeah. And that got the CIA's attention. Big time. They saw a chance to get intel, maybe discredit the Sandinistas.
So the CIA wanted photographic proof linking the Sandinistas to drug trafficking, and Seal was the key.
That's the story. He had the access, the skills. They allegedly rigged his plane with hidden cameras for this incredibly risky mission into Nicaragua, despite his protests about the danger.
And according to the transcript, that was the only direct involvement the CIA had with Seal.
That's what the source claims.
Yeah.
And yeah, if the Medellin cartel had found out he was working with the U.S. government, he was a dead man. Instantly.
Which, eventually, he was. He got caught, became a DEA informant.
Right. But then his cover was blown. Spectacularly. President Reagan showed those alleged photos Seal took on national TV. Exposed the Sandinista connection.
Which basically signed Seal's death warrant. For you listening, you see the high stakes, the geopolitics mixing with the drug trade.
It's incredible. Just 3 weeks later, Seal was assassinated by the cartel. Brutally.
And despite all his work for the DEA, he died broke. Used his fortune on government operations.
Apparently so. Left behind a life insurance policy for his family, though. The transcript notes he never brought down Escobar directly, but he gave the DEA unprecedented insight into the Medellin cartel.
Yeah.
A truly remarkable and ultimately tragic story for you to think about. Underscores the immense risks. It really is an incredible tragic tale. Now let's pivot slightly. To another connection we found that's just fascinating and maybe unexpected. The link between drug smuggling and skydiving.
Skydiving. Okay, yeah. On the surface, totally unrelated, right? Flying drugs versus jumping out of planes. But there were overlaps.
Seems so. Those customer reviews for the book Sugar Alpha, they kept mentioning both things, skydiving and smuggling. Some reviewers, skydivers themselves, even knew the author, Roger Nelson.
And they described the book as action-packed, noting how it mixed the two worlds. For you, that suggests it wasn't just a one-off thing.
Right. One reviewer, also a skydiver, gave this interesting inside look at the sport's history and how, maybe surprisingly, smuggling was kind of present in certain parts of that community.
And another review mentioned the author having every good personality trait despite the illegal stuff. That's a complex picture.
Yeah, but then another review was more critical, right? You mentioned puffery trying to make Roger Nelson look like he was a saint. So maybe a more nuanced reality.
We also found that 5280 magazine article about a Denver marijuana smuggler, Joe, who was also a skydiving legend.
That's him. Reportedly used his company planes to fly pot, sometimes 900 pounds a trip between Denver and Minneapolis. For you, that's a really concrete example of this weird connection.
And the author of that piece actually skydived with Joe and drew a parallel.
Yeah, between the adrenaline rush of free fall, then the relief of the parachute opening, compared that feeling to pulling off a risky smuggling run and getting away clean.
That intense exhilaration followed by profound relief.
Exactly. The risks in both worlds were huge. And maybe it was that shared element, pushing boundaries, intense sensations. Maybe that drew certain people to both.
It really makes you wonder about the psychology, doesn't it? People drawn to high-risk stuff. What is it about that adrenaline lifestyle?
Meticulous planning needed for both, too.
Right.
Logistics for a secret flight, focus and skill for skydiving, especially back then.
Yeah, for you it raises that question. Are there personality traits that sort of predispose someone to both these seemingly different worlds?
It's a compelling thought. And speaking of adrenaline and pushing limits, maybe we should briefly mention Point Break.
Yes, the movie. Fictional, of course, but it taps into that same allure, right? Extreme activities operating outside the line. We actually did a whole deep dive on the original 91 film and the less loved 2015 remake.
We did. The original, Keanu Reeves, Patrick Swayze, bank-robbing surfers, undercover FBI guy, pulled into their adrenaline world. Had that weird spiritual thing going on, too.
We talked a lot about plausibility, character motivations, the film's impact. It really stuck around in pop culture.
The remake, way more focused on just showing off extreme sports.
Yeah.
Dirt biking, wingsuit flying, big wave surfing. Felt more like a series of cool action shots than a story.
We called it REI Fast and Furious, didn't we?
It's something like that, yeah. But skydiving was key in both. Those iconic scenes in the original, the wingsuit flying in the remake.
And for you, it's interesting seeing those fictional portrayals of extreme risk, knowing about the real-world links we found between skydiving and smuggling, defying gravity, pushing limits. It's a theme that runs through both.
We definitely preferred the original. Better characters, better crime story, more depth. The remake looked cool sometimes, but leg to soul.
Yeah, we even did those Joke Dundee Awards for least plausible moment and worst supporting drink. It was fun.
It was. And it just shows for you how that chase for extreme thrills, ways, jumping from planes, even crime really captures our imagination in stories and in real life.
Okay, so bringing it back to the ongoing reality. Air smuggling didn't just stop in the 80s.
Not at all. Important for you to know. We found that news piece about the French air cocaine trial. 7 people convicted in France recently.
So it clearly demonstrates that using planes for drug trafficking, it's persisted, the methods might change, the scale, but it's still happening.
Absolutely. That continuous cat and mouse game between law enforcement and smugglers using the skies, it continues.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive for you, let's just quickly recap the main threads.
We've seen the incredible ingenuity, the sheer audacity of air smuggling back in the 70s and 80s. We saw Florida's central role.
And those really surprising connections, like with skydiving.
And we've highlighted the huge risks involved for you. Not just legal trouble, but real danger to life and limb.
Yeah, the details from all these sources, they really paint a vivid, complex picture of this underground world, hopefully giving you a unique perspective.
And that leads us to a final thought, something for you to chew on. What is it about the allure of the extreme, whether it's sports or crime? What drives people to take such massive risks?
Are there real connections between these seemingly different worlds? What can we learn by looking at where they intersect?
Maybe digging deeper into stories like Barry Seals or books like Sugar Alpha, or even rewatching Point Break with this context might give you more insight.
Yeah, into that enduring human fascination with pushing boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Venturing into the unknown. Definitely something to think about.
That's it for this episode of Hangar 51 Files, where we uncover the hidden, investigate the unexplained, and challenge the official story. If you found this episode insightful, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with those who refuse to accept surface-level narratives. For more deep dives, exclusive research, and behind-the-scenes content, visit www.hangar51files.com, our YouTube channel, at Hangar 51 Files, or our Substack, hangar51files.substack.com. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and keep questioning everything. This is Hangar 51 Files, signing off. No speculation, no clickbait, just hard-hitting research, expert analysis, and the pursuit of truth.